G'day everybody. So today I thought I would take the time to have a look at the 3 astrophotography mounts that I own, that I have owned over the last 2 years. Now I've used all 3 of these mounts quite substantially now. This is the first mount I got, the HEQ5 Pro. The second mount I got is the little mount here, which was the Skywatcher AZ-GTi. And the third mount I got here is the EQ6. Now, these 2 mounts especially, you might also know them under the names Orion or Skywatcher. Now here in Australia, you also get the name Saxon. So these 2 mounts are actually Saxon. But basically, if you're familiar with Orion, Skywatcher, Saxon, they're all made by Synta. So they're pretty much all the same mounts, apart from the little logos that you'll see on them. So as I said, the Skywatcher AZ-GTi over here is the lightest mount that I own. It's a very good portable mount. A very, what you'd consider a very small sized mount that's going to take a fairly small payload. The reason I got the middle one here, which is the HEQ5 Pro, for obvious reasons, is I thought it will sit nicely in the middle. So it will take what you can see on it now, which is a mid-size refractor, but equally I could also put a camera lens on it or a very small setup. Whereas obviously with the small rig down there, you are really limited to more setups that I would say fall into either camera lenses or small telescopes. And then of course over here, the big Saxon, this is obviously a more robust mount. There is the EQ6R Pro version of this, which is slightly different. I prefer the AZ EQ version because of basically the knobs on it are, I think, much better engineered. And also the way that you adjust the altitude back here, and also the way that you can adjust the RA axes here. I just think it's a lot more simpler, and it's a little bit more, I feel it's a little bit more sensibly built. So yeah, they're the 3 mounts, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through each of these 3 mounts and let's look at what I use it for and what I perceive to be the pros and cons of it. So what I'm going to do briefly is I'm going to switch over to my little whiteboard where I've made some notes, and let's go through and actually have a look at these 3 mounts and get a bit of a lowdown on them and what they're capable of. Alright guys, so I have written down some specs on a whiteboard here because I know I'm going to miss something if I don't. So I just want to go through the basic specs of each mount first, so we don't forget anything. So as I said, they're all pretty much the same mount, made by Synta, Skywatcher, Saxon, Orion. The small mount that I've got is the AZ-GTi. That's 1.5 kilo is in terms of the mount head. Obviously it'll be heavier if you add, your tripod on and whatever. The payload of that mount is 5 kilograms. Of course, that's the maximum payload. I probably wouldn't put 5 kilos on there. I'd probably put more like 3 or something like that. It's Vixen only, so it won't take the wider Losmandy bars, unless I guess you get some sort of adapter that would enable you to do that. It's 12 volt, and you can control that with the mount there with the SynScan app. And equally, like most mounts, you can get the EQ direct cable and you can connect it to your laptop and control it with software. So it is a fully go-to mount that you can computer control. So just a quick one here on pros and cons for that mount. It does need an EQ modification. So that mount by default is an azimuth mount. It's not an equatorial mount. So because of that, you need to buy a wedge to create the angle. And then you need to update the firmware on the mount itself. It's actually very straightforward, and there's a lot of videos out there how to do it. So don't be too intimidated by that because it's not complicated if you're considering it, but you do need to do those to use it as an equatorial mount. I'd say the tracking on it is okay. You've got to remember it's a cheaper, lighter mount. I think that mount's around the 700, 800 Australian dollars mark. So, but the good thing is it's meant for shorter focal length. So I find that the tracking on it, I can get about 1 arc second. If you don't know what that means, that's pretty good in terms of tracking. And especially for those short focal lengths, if you're getting 1.5 arc seconds, it's actually pretty good when you're using things like camera lenses and you're going up to focal lengths of sort of about 250 mil, something like that. Very easy to move around. You can move the whole thing as a complete unit. You could even shove it in your car if you want, as it is. And it's great for camera lenses. It just works well with that kind of weight. So if you've got a lot of camera lenses that you're thinking, wow, I could just begin my astrophotography with all these, you know, nice Canon prime lenses or whatever, that's a great little mount maybe to start with. HEQ5 Pro, so the white mount that I showed you in the middle, that's the mid-level mount. That weighs 15.4 kilograms, and its payload is 13.5 kilograms. Again, you never really want to go up to the maximum payload. You could for visual, but for astrophotography, you probably want to keep that 13 more like about 8 kilos, something in that sort of range. Usually they say about half, but I reckon you can often go a little bit more than half. It's Vixen and Losmandy compatible, the latest Skywatcher or Saxon HEQ5 Pro. So it will take both of the mounting bars. Again, 12 volt. That one does come with a hand controller. If you want to plug the hand controller in and use the go-to through the hand controller, you can. I never use it because I mainly just use the software. Again, you need to buy a cable if you want to connect it to your laptop. I don't think even the later versions of that come with a USB cable. So I think you do need to buy the cable. Lots of places, by the way, sell those cables. They're usually called EQ direct cables. Lynx, Astro sell those cables, and a bunch of other people. It's a good all-rounder mount, so it's got that nice sweet spot in the middle. Like I said, good for probably up to 8 kilos, so you can still get a decent size refractor on there. Probably you could go up to 100 mil in terms of a refractor on that, and you'll still be okay. I do think it needs, that mount, I did do the Rowan belt modification. So the tracking on that mount when I got it was not great. I was struggling to get good guiding on that mount. Now maybe I got a bad model. These are mass manufactured mounts. You hear that sometimes people get a really good one, sometimes people don't get such a good one. I struggled with the guiding when I got that HEQ5 Pro. So the first thing I did was the Rowan belt mod on it, and it helped a lot. So now I can easily get guiding 1 arc second and below on that mount. I think I've had it at about 0.7 as best, or 0.6, but in my opinion, you'll probably do that belt mod eventually. So do consider either buying it modded or doing that modification if you're going to get that mount. It's somewhat portable. You can lift that whole thing. You wouldn't want to lift it a long way, but you certainly can lift that entire rig. I've even lifted it with the telescope on, so it's not too bad in terms of weight. Again, no built-in USB port, so you will need that EQ direct cable. All right, let's go on to the big one now. So the last mount. Now the reason I got that mount is because I was starting to go up to bigger telescopes. So I'd bought a Skywatcher Esprit 120. You just saw the Celestron C 9.25 on it. So I was getting up to that 9-10 kilo just for my telescope tube alone, let alone the camera and all the other weight that comes with it. So I knew I needed a bigger mount. There's no way I was going to put those on the HEQ5 Pro. It's just not going to take that sort of load. So the AZ EQ6 is that perfect mount when you want to go that next step up in terms of size. So it weighs 20 kilograms, obviously more with the counterweights on. The payload that it will take is 20 kilograms. So again, you know, roughly you're looking at halving that. Now I have, with the Esprit or my Celestron C9 tube, I have a good 13 kilos on that, and it's handling it fine. So it's definitely a decent quality mount, and you can definitely push it over that 10 kilos. I reckon you could get 14 kilos on that mount. Seems to handle it pretty well. Vixen Losmandy compatible in terms of the bars, that's fine. 12 volt. Again, it comes with a hand controller. That particular model, and a lot of the later models of the EQ6R Pro or the AZ EQ6 do come with a USB port, so you can connect it directly with the USB cable directly into your laptop or PC or whatever. It will take, like I said, so positives, cons, takes a heavy payload. It's got very good adjustments of the RA and the declination axes. So when you need to polar align and you need to change those, change your left, right, up and down, and also when you need to the actual levers for disengaging the two axes, they're just very robust. And from what I've seen of the EQ6R Pro, I do think that the way that those levers operate to disengage the two clutches are a lot better on the AZ EQ6R, but they're both good mounts. Obviously it's not really a portable mount that, you know, you're going to want to put that either on a trolley, or you're going to want to you're going to have to lift the mount separately to the telescope and take the counterweights off. I tend to leave that where it is in my garden with a cover over it. It guides very well. That mount guided very well straight out of the box, about 0.65. It's always been really good with its guiding. So in contrast to the HEQ5 Pro, that one did guide well out of the box, and it also has a belt. It does run with a belt on one of the axes, which is very good. And that's about it. And yes, it's got the USB port, which we've already mentioned. So let's now go and take a look at the three mounts. And now we've done the whiteboard, and let's see how I use them and how I've got them set up. Okay guys, so let's have a look at this first one. This is the little mount. We may as well go in order of size. So this little AZ-GTi, like I said, it is a great mount for portability. You obviously, like this mount, I just lift the whole thing up with whatever I've got on it, plonk it on the ground. Sometimes I'll make a few marks on the ground so I don't have to polar align it every time. But it is a great little mount. Like I said, the tracking on it it's not perfect, and it can be a little bit more variable than the other mounts. So you can find your tracking on this can go anywhere, I find, between about 1 and 1.5. But I also find that because I'm using camera lenses, and the maximum focal length I've used on this is 200 millimeters, as one of my camera lenses is a 200mm Canon, and it was fine actually on that. Primarily what I use on this mount for myself is a Samyang 135 lens, and one of my astrophotography cameras, often the ASI 533. But you know, I've probably only got about 2 kilos, maybe sometimes I'll have 3 kilos, and it handles that kind of weight fine. You will have to just work out the best way of mounting on this. I've got a Vixen bar, and then I've had to buy a separate Prima Luce ring to attach my camera on, and then you've got to work out how to mount your guide scope and whatever kind of controller that you want on it. In terms of the Equatorial modification, so you can see that I've added the wedge here from Skywatcher. So this is the Star Adventurer wedge that I've added onto it, and I've upgraded the firmware myself. Now at the same time, you can actually buy these, and some places will sell them where they've already done the modification for you. So it comes as a kit. They'll supply you with the wedge, they've already flashed the firmware. The one other thing to note with these is that Skywatcher have recently also just brought out the Star Adventurer GTi. So that's kind of like, I think what people were asking for with this mount. They didn't want to do the Equatorial modification. So that's basically Skywatcher's new portable Equatorial mount, is the Star Adventurer GTi. Now, I do think it's significantly more expensive than this. I have a feeling it's more like $1,200, and I think this mount is about 800 bucks or something along those lines. So I think if you don't mind doing the upgrade yourself, you can save a little bit of money with this one, because the payload that they both take is the same, it's 5 kilos. But hey, you can make that choice, whatever you feel better with. But like I said, a great little portable mount. And I use it with the ASI Air as well quite often, but it's a super little mount. So let's put this to one side and we'll go on to our next mount. All right guys, so let's move on to the second mount. Now this was the very first mount that I bought. And like I said, the reason I bought it is because I did my research, and in terms of Skywatcher mounts, this was the one that fell in the middle. Everybody said, yeah, it's a good reliable mount and it takes that nice medium payload, but it's also good if you want to put smaller stuff on it as well. This is also the first telescope that I got, and it's an 80mm refractor mounted on a Losmandy bar here. I've got a little 50mm guide scope there. I've got electronic focuser on this. So, you know, I'm probably looking at in the region of 4 kilograms, something like that there. So like I said, I did have to do the row and belt mod on this. And basically what that involves is you need to take off this plate on the side. And there's a couple of gears in here which control the two axes on the mount. And the row and belt mod comes with some replacement gears, and it comes with a couple of belts. It makes the mount a lot quieter, and it makes it guide a lot better too. I have a feeling from memory that was in the region of maybe about 200 Australian dollars. Look it up, it's somewhere around there, but do factor that in if you're thinking of buying this mount, because in my case it definitely needed it. Other things to talk about with this mount is I did also eventually change the head on the mount here. A lot of these mounts come with the standard mounting head on the top here. It's like a little puck and then a bracket on top, which allows you to mount different mounting bars in them, Vixen. They often tend to be a little bit on the short side, so they don't really spread the weight that well. And they're sometimes not the best engineered, so you tend to find a lot of people do this modification with the mount head. It's not essential, but it does seem to make getting the scope in and out quite a bit easier, and I think it spreads the weight and the load out a little bit as well. In terms of the way that I run this mount, I have a little mini PC on this one, and I have I've got a conduit here which comes out with my cables. This is all plugged into my little mini PC down the bottom, and then I put my telescope on and I just plug these, which is basically the power and the USB, into the back of whichever telescope I'm using. I kind of like to make my setups quite modular, so I don't have to have everything sat on the actual telescope, so I can switch which telescope, because sometimes I will put my small setups on this mount as well. So yeah, I have the mini PC set up there, and then on the side here I've also got a little dew heater from Hi-Tech Astro. I just have this velcroed on, and this has got 4 dew outputs, and it's also got 2 12-volt DC outputs. And I use those 2 12-volt DC outputs to power my mount and also to power my camera, my astrophotography camera. So yeah, great little mount. I think as a beginner mount, it's one of those sweet spots, and I do recommend this mount if you're sort of getting into astrophotography, because it gives you many options. It's reasonably portable, it's quite reliable, and you know, it's one of those mounts. It's been around a long time and it's been tried and tested. So that's the HEQ5 Pro. One last thing I will say about these mounts, especially the HEQ5 Pro and the AZ-EQ6, the mount legs on these, I collapse all of the tripod feet unless I have to raise them for some reason. Now, it doesn't really matter that much if your tripod is level, so long as it's not ridiculously uneven. I feel these tripod legs are not made that well, and I don't like extending them out. I just feel it introduces another area instability into your rig. So I like to collapse all the feet, even if it's a little bit unlevel, and I find that works better than actually having the tripod legs extended. And then what I tend to do is I use these little vibration suppression pads and I put them under the feet. And it's a strange thing, but especially if you live near a road, those little vibrations, they do have an impact on your guiding. So I have found the combination of collapsing the tripod legs and using vibration suppression pads definitely helps with your guiding and not losing exposures. Anyway, that's the HEQ5 Pro. Okay everyone, let's go for the last mount now. I wasn't about to move this one into position, so I've left it where it is because this one's pretty darn heavy. So this is the AZ-EQ6. Now it's a little bit different to the normal EQ6R Pro, which is very popular as well, simply because you can run this mount in either Alt-Az mode or Equatorial mode. Now I've only ever run it in Equatorial mode, but it does actually come with a second mount head, and you can actually mount even 2 telescopes in Alt-Azimuth mode, which, like I said, I've never done, but apparently you can do that. So this mount, like I've mentioned, once I moved to bigger telescopes like the Celestron C925 or my Skywatcher Esprit, this is basically the mount you need, probably as a minimum actually. However, yeah, it does really hold that payload well. So this is managing that 13 sort of, I've probably got between 13 and 14 kilos on this thing when it's fully loaded up, and it does manage that well. And I find my guiding, I can usually get it around 0.6, 0.65, that kind of guiding. So its guiding is pretty reliable, this mount. Like I mentioned before, the levers on this are very good. So it's actually got a lever back here to disengage the clutch here. It's got this lever here, which you can wind in and out to basically change the elevation of the mount here. And then it's got a couple of levers here for your polar alignment, a couple of knobs here to change it for your polar alignment. But all of these work well. So I really like this feature, and it's also got this here, which is for the RA axis here. And you basically just screw this to disengage the clutch on this axis. So these work really well. Again, the tripod legs, I have them folded completely down because I don't want to introduce vibrations or instability into my mount. Especially, you know, I have the pier on it as well. So I have this little, I can't remember what they call this thing, if it's a pier extender, something like that. But basically, it extends the height of the mount from the tripod. And it means that I don't need to worry about the camera here when the telescope is tilted right down and pointing up ahead. It means I don't need to worry about the camera crashing into one of the tripod legs here, which I nearly had happen to me once. So that's why I've got this little extender on here. In terms of the setup of this mount, I have it quite similar to my other mount. I have a little USB hub at the front here, which is just the right size actually to fit onto this little extender. And then what I do is I bring a conduit down from that hub, and it goes through the mount here, just clipped on with a little Velcro, sorry, not a little clip here. And I plug this into my camera at the back here for my power and everything. And the good thing about this mount, the AZ-EQ6, it does have like a cavity here, so you can thread cables through it. You don't have to connect them to the outside. So it does make organizing that a little bit easier. For this mount, I actually tend to leave it where it is in the garden because it's such a pain to move. And I tend to just put it under a big cover. And then in terms of connections, what I actually do with this mount is, because my garage is right next to my telescope outside in the garden, I actually just run a big long 15-meter USB cable from this hub basically up through my window into my garage, and that works really well, so I can have it connected to my desktop. I have also changed on this mount the mount head again here. I changed it to a geoptic one because I'm putting big telescopes on. I wanted that big broad area here to be able to clamp on, a nice big area to clamp onto my Losmandy bar here, or whichever bar I'm using. Again, I've used the high-tech Astro controller here, and I have this velcroed onto the side, and it has the 4 dew ports again, and I use a couple of power cables coming out here, which I thread through here. One goes directly to my mount, and the other power cable goes to my threads through here through the conduit, and it goes out to my camera. So if you're looking for something for those heavy payloads, if you're up around sort of 10 to 13 kilos and you want a reliable mount, I would say this is a great little mount. And if this is really where you think you're heading, it's always hard to tell when you start out in this hobby. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to do this video, to give you a bit of a background on where you might land on a mount, because it's very difficult to know when you begin the hobby. Are you going to want more than one mount? Are you going to find that you've got a too heavy mount, a too light mount? It's very difficult. But if you know that you're going to get into the hobby and you're going to want a whole range of weighted scopes, like from a heavy one to a medium one to a little tiny scope, I would probably recommend going for something like an AZ-EQ6 or an EQ6R Pro, because you know it's going to take all of those variations in whichever telescope you want to stick on it. Okay everyone, So that pretty much wraps up our overview of these 3 mounts. I did want to try and just look at these 3 mounts for people just getting into the hobby, because I appreciate it is difficult to know where you're going to land, whether or not you're going to stay in the hobby, whether or not you're going to want bigger scopes. And you know, I think most people, if you stay in the hobby long enough, you're definitely going to end up with with more than 1 mount. I guess knowing where to jump in, you've just got to figure out what your priorities are. You know, if you're mainly a DSLR user and you've got a lot of good camera lenses, you may want to go on the portable type route, especially if you're traveling a lot. You know, something like this would be great. If you're unsure, but you're mainly going to work from your back garden, and you want something that's going to take a reasonable payload, like a smallish refractor or a medium-sized refractor, or a medium-sized Newtonian, and it can take maybe your camera lenses too, this is a great option to go for. And if you are erring more on the side of you're definitely going to consider bigger telescopes, or maybe a range of telescopes and heavier ones, then you know it's hard to go wrong with the EQ6R Pro or the AZ-GTi like I have here. So yeah, there's lots of options and lots of things to consider, and chances are, like I said, you'll end up with more than 1 mount eventually. One thing I'll mention is that because I do store my mount outside quite a lot, especially my big one, because I don't want to lift it in, you do just need to be a bit careful with drying things out. So often mine will stay under a cover, but often the next day, after I've imaged especially, I'll just take the cover off it, especially if it's going to be nice, let everything dry out, let the mount dry out for a few hours, because often you get a lot of dew the next day because it's been cold. Often on clear nights you'll get that dew forming on everything, and just let everything dry out. Let the inside of the cover dry out as much as you can and keep everything dry. The other thing that you can do that really helps is, let's just get these dehumidifier type things. So I often either have these, and you can see how much water is in this. That literally hangs on my big mount back here underneath my cover, and you can see the amount of water that takes out underneath the cover, all of that moisture that's building up under there. And the other option is you can get these little reusable ones that you put into the microwave as well. So these are quite good. You just microwave them for 3 minutes, chuck them in a bag, get a few of them, and do the same thing. But just be aware of that if you do want to put your mount outside. For me, I'd much rather keep especially my big mount outside, because it encourages me to use it a lot more. Even if it doesn't last as long, I want to use the equipment that I've got. So for me, I'm fine with that, and I'm happy with that. And I've never had any issues with my big mount, even though it's been out there for like 6 months. So yeah, that's an option that you might want to consider, or at least a trolley for a bigger mount. So look, if you enjoyed the video, if this was any use, I hope it's helped a little bit. Maybe consider subscribing to my channel or giving me a like. That's very much appreciated. Helps my channel grow a little bit. And I hope that you got something out of this. So I'll say clear skies to everybody. And if you're about to make a purchase, I hope it's the right one. Yeah. The right one. Yeah. So I'll catch you later, guys. I don't know whose bright idea this was. I have to move all of this back now. Oh my God. Okay. There we go.